do and enjoy, which was true. Because you made your own entertainment in those days. We would skate. We would swim in a little inlet of the lake. It was designated for swimming. I couldn't ice skate because my ankles were floppy and they would turn, so that didn't work for me. It did for Carl. I wasn't able to ice skate like Carl because of weak ankles. I did a little skiing, but not as much as Carl. The group around my age had a great time sledding. If conditions were right, we could start at the top of the hill and go as far as town. After several hours, we would pile into our house. And if my father was home and not working, he would help us out of our wet outer clothing and hang them up back of the stove. There were lines there, and they would dry.
Sure.
And then he would sit down with us and play cards a lot of times. And believe me, he played to win. He didn't give any quarter. He loved to play cards.
Now, what kind of card games?
Well, I remember the game of 500. We didn't play bridge in canasta. And my mother belonged to a canasta club, which were mostly the neighborhood women.
Okay.
My mother would give us something hot to drink. Seems like something's missing there. Maybe I have them out of order. We would often fish in the lake, and sometimes Dad was take us fishing in Faroe State Park along the Mississippi River in Prempelo. Once each winter, our neighbor Alfred Tresme would take the neighborhood children on a sleigh ride around the lake. Then we would end up at Olson's for oyster supper. We also had hay rides in the summertime. That wasn't every summer, but quite often we did it. If Alfred wasn't too busy with his farm work, then. We would make up and fill May baskets with flowers to give to neighbors, dressing in homemade costumes for Halloween. We always did that. That was fun. There was a similar event at Christmas called juleboking, which is Norwegian for Christmas fooling.
Okay.
Or Christmas fooling, I wrote that down. And we would dress up in costumes and go around to the neighbors and we were given treats. That was fun. And I can remember once I put on men's clothing and I took some of the clippings from my mother's hair and made braids. And, because I had men's clothing and then yet the braids. And I thought I would fool everybody. And I fooled most people until I got to old man Knudsen. He must have been in his 70s then. He said, "Oh, I know who that is. That's Junice Paulson. I can tell by her ankles." It was fun, I said. If it rained, my father and his crew had to stop working if they were working on outside things. He would come home and say, "Who wants to go to lacrosse?" And we would go for an afternoon and evening of shopping. And no, we didn't get permission from school. When I went the next day, then it was always just in the afternoon. And my mother would just write an excuse, and nobody ever questioned it.
Just an excuse that we went shopping?
Yeah.
Okay.
Went to lacrosse or whatever.
Okay.
If the weather cleared, we liked going to Monkey Island, we called it. It was Merrick Park, where there was a big hilly area in the center, home to a lot of monkeys. Or we would go up to Granddad's Bluff, overlooking the city with a park area at the top. There were several other parks along the Mississippi. We were given a lot of freedom, although my mother liked to know in general where we would be. She didn't say, "Oh, you can't go," or anything, but she just let me know sort of where you're going to be. We roamed around freely and always had so many projects going. In the summer, the evenings, the neighborhood children would often gather at our place and play games such as hide and go seek, red light, duck goose. And then there was something we called kickity can. Have you ever heard of that?
Kick the can?
I suppose it's the same thing. You dig a hole lay a stick across it, and then you'd have another stick, and you'd, fire it toward a goal.
Oh, no, I never heard of that.
Oh. One or two of my girlfriends and I wrote a play called The Quest of the Spanish Lady. We had costumes and props were ready to show. However, an epidemic of infantile paralysis, or polio, struck, and we had to have it canceled. There were so many things going on, I realize I can only touch on some of them. But we always had something going on. And we'd go downtown on Saturday nights, and Dad would come home a little early from work, and we'd take the car and find a good spot along town. And some of my mother's friends would always come and join her in the car, and they'd sit in the car and gossip and talk, watch the people and get some popcorn or something like that. Well, I and my friends would go marching around the square, and sometimes we'd go to a movie. And this town square had a band concert every Saturday night, and then they'd have things like ice cream socials and strawberry festivals and things like that. So it was fun. And I guess that's all I had. Oh, and then I was going to have other categories that I was going to write about. But I at least got a start on it.
You got a very good start, yeah. It's nice to get this on tape, too.
Oh, you got it on tape?
Oh, yeah, I've been tape recording everything.
Oh.
Yeah. I thought you knew
that's
that.
Fine.
Yeah. Well, good.
So I hope I can't remember what other categories I was going to have now. I've got health and education.
Now, did your parents go to church very much?
Oh, yeah.
Every Sunday?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Carl didn't like I don't know whether he went very much after he was grown up. He didn't like the chanting that the Lutheran church had. There was a lot of chanting.
Oh.
Of course, that was the first church to separate from the Catholic Church, the Lutheran church.
Yeah,
so they still maintained some of that chanting.
Oh, okay.
And he didn't care for that. Now, I joined the Luther League, which, was it was like a young people's organization. I wouldn't say it was terribly active, though, but I always went to it. My father always dressed up in a suit when he went downtown Saturday nights and Wednesday. Later, they band concerts on Wednesday night, too. And then he always dressed up in a hat and a suit, going to church, of course. He didn't wear a hat a lot at home. I mean, if he went downtown, he dressed up in a suit and shirt and tie. But he would wear a cap. In those days they wore caps with brims.
Yeah.
And then he'd often hunt up some of his friends, and they'd either stand around, and my father said a lot of them commented on women's legs.
Sure.
But once in a while he'd get some of them, and they'd get together and go to the back building, and there was an empty room there, and they would play cards.
Oh, at the bank.
He'd go downtown, not too often, but sometimes, and they'd get together and play cards.
Okay.
They didn't gamble.
No.
They just played cards for, they may have used some chips or something, I don't know about that, but
Did your dad drink much?
Oh, not one speck.
Not one drop? Okay.
No, he didn't. As a matter of fact, I don't think he would have anyway. But once when he was working on the Watkins plant, I think the first year in Winona, he worked with a good friend of him who did the same kind of thing called Ted Larson, and he was a drinker. And he would stop at one of the taverns, and my dad would sit in the car and wait for him. Well, it got to be pretty cold. So once he went in to had beer. Well, when he came home, my mother smelled the beer, and she started to cry. He never did it again. But he he didn't drink anyway. It was just,
Okay. For just that one time.
Yeah. But this Ted Larson that did so much drinking died at 39 from a heart attack.
Wow.
From drinking too much. He was built, he was about 6'2", a real good-looking man. And he left a wife and 3 children.
Well, that's a shame.
But his son turned out okay because he went, I don't know, to some town in Wisconsin where he was named Man of the Year. I don't know what he did, but anyway, he turned out fine. The girls were fine, too. But I've always remembered Cora Larson, one of his daughters. She'd often walk home with us, and she'd make fun of somebody that stuttered. And, she started stuttering herself. Couldn't get over it. So, anyway, I guess I got to be a habit with her.
I stuttered a little bit growing up, and
I never heard that.
I do it on a rare occasion still, but what helped me when I was a freshman in college, there was a guy in our dorm who stuttered.
Yeah.
And he was one of the most popular guys in the dorm.
Is that right?
And everyone ignored his stuttering because he had such a dynamic personality. Everyone wanted to be around him.
Yeah.
And after that, if I ever stuttered, I wasn't embarrassed about it at all.
No.
So.
Well, I can't remember your ever stuttering.
No, I never stuttered a lot, but just occasionally.
Yeah.
And I still, on a rare occasion, I'll get stuck on, a letter or something, But,
that can happen
big
to
deal,
anybody.
yeah. But,
sure.
Yeah, so.
Well,
that's great that you wrote that down.
Do you want me to finish this? I can't remember what other categories I was going to write about.
Well, if you can think of some new information, that would be cool. Yeah, if you could. But, whatever's convenient, for you, if you can think of things.
But, everything takes me so long now to get things done. Things that I used to be able to do in 10 minutes may take me a whole morning now.
Yeah.
Because I can't stand very long. So I use a lot of prepared food now. When I was talking about my doctor thought I should have Meals on Wheels. And I said, well, frankly, I didn't like it at all when I had it in 1992, I guess it was, because at that time I had my first cataract operation, and you weren't supposed to lift anything at that time.
Okay.
And Dick was already having problems, so I had Meals on Wheels. I thought I needed it then.
Okay.
But, I didn't like it. For the evening meal, at that time I elected to take a 2 meals. You'd get something like a bologna sandwich. And that was it. And the noon meals weren't. I didn't care for it. And the one that was the head of the Visiting Nurses Association, I told her once, and she said, well, Junice, I don't know anyone that likes it. So that's the difference between here and at your place. But it may be better now. That was back in 1990.
Things might have changed. Yeah.
But like Randy said, well, if you're going to do that in a way when you didn't seem to care for it anyway, you might as well get things from takeout places.
Yeah, get it delivered.
Yeah, and then usually on Sunday night, they bring me a meal of some kind or other.
Okay. They usually come over on Sundays?
Well, they never stay very long because I don't have the setup of things that they have,
Okay.
They have a great big TV in the family room and everything, with the computers and they come, but they don't, like I say, there isn't that much for them to do.
Okay.
But Randy gets insulted if I say I don't want a dinner on Sunday night. But they either make something and bring it to me or pick something up from a restaurant.
Okay, well, that's nice.
Yeah. And often it's enough for 2 meals. So, I get along. I'm sure the things I get from takeout probably aren't the healthiest thing in the world, but there's nothing else I can do about it. I cannot stand and cook because if I do, stand more than 5 minutes, I start getting, faint and feeling like I'm going to flop over.
Oh, well, that's not good. Yeah.
No.
So you have to keep that to a minimum. Yeah.
I was trying to think if there was anything else that I didn't have in this. I think I told you all about Carl's. I didn't think about the fact that Carl wanted to do all these other things until just lately. I thought, well, he didn't have a lot of playmates like I did because there were more children my age. Well, there were children his age, but there were girls.
Right.
So that's how he started associating with
hanging around construction sites and talking with the men there and getting interested in what they're doing and things like that.
And doing things at home, I can remember one other experience that I had. I don't know if you have that picture of Carl sitting beside the steps in the back, and he had a bandage around his head.
So.
Well, I don't remember how he got hurt that time. But another time, Mother would play jacks with me if I didn't have anything else going on. And she was pretty good at it. And once when Carl came and sat down, she playfully tapped him with a little hammer, just a little bit like this for fun. Well, I grabbed the hammer and said, "Here, I'll do that for you." And I whacked him real hard.
You did?
Yeah. I thought she couldn't. But he did. Apparently, I wasn't strong enough. So it didn't really hurt. And
were you mad at him?
No, I wasn't mad at him. I just thought she was trying to hit him. I wasn't able to. As I say, I don't remember that we did a lot of quarreling, except we did some arguing when we got older. But that's typical teenage behavior.
No one gets along perfectly.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you came pretty close to it.
Well, one time, though, my mother, it was my job always to dry the dishes. And she didn't want to let me go of that, no matter what project I had going. Well, I guess I was being kind of, sarcastic or something. Not sarcastic, that's not the right word. But
a little stubborn, you mean, or?
Stubborn or sassy, maybe.
Okay.
And so she slapped me on the face. Oh, I was furious. Nobody had ever done anything. But it was just a light tap. But she said, "You're going to finish drying those dishes." And I knew it, but what I said to her, "If you ever do that again, I'm going to run away and join a monastery." I didn't say nunnery, I said a monastery.
Okay.
Well, that would be more interesting, I guess.
Well, but that was an incredibly rare instance.
It was the only
time you did.
Yeah. But, I could get kind of sassy sometimes, I guess. And Carl, he argued with my mother, too. I remember that. But at the same time, Carl was very protective of her. For instance, when my Uncle August had an operation for, what did you call it, mastoid operation?
Okay.
It was, in the head, anyway. And he was never the same after that. So I guess it must have been after my grandmother died. He came down to our place to stay. And he stayed in the downstairs bedroom. And he would come out in his underwear when my mother had company because he was sort of, out of his head.
Okay.
Well, so my mother got nervous about it. That's what Carl said. I was younger then. And so he arranged for my Uncle August to go to some kind of a home. And while he was in that home, he contracted tuberculosis. So, and I remember Carl used to say that my Uncle August, who was either 6'4" or 6'5", a real strapping, good-looking Norwegian with sandy, curly hair, and he always said that Uncle August is the most sensible man I have ever known. And then she had one brother, Uncle George, and I know my mother, he was sort of nervous a lot.
Okay.
And I know my mother said in big families there's often one that's a little different, which I suppose could be. And he would come and stay, you know, because he was always going to the doctor. And I remember Uncle Albert, yeah, he was married, but he had gotten blood poisoning. It was called then septicemia, I suppose. And he stayed at our place for quite a long time, you know, to be doctored for that, because they didn't have antibiotics in those days.
Okay.
So I don't know what they did for it.
Did he recover?
What? Yeah, he did recover. But our place was a hangout when they need, except for Uncle Julius, who looked just exactly like my mother. When my mother in the wintertime sometimes would go out when my father was splitting wood, and she'd put on a man's cap and maybe a man's jacket, and she looked exactly like my Uncle Julius. My Uncle Julius was the most prosperous of my brothers. He had a nice, beautiful farm just outside the village of Ettrick, and he always had to have the best of everything. He got the first Victrola, he got the first player piano, he got the first, in the area at least, he thought he was so smart because he got an FHA loan. So, you know, he was able to finance it. Then he built a new barn, and my father worked on that. And then they had a barn dance. And I remember my mother helping in the kitchen. You know, they had all kinds of food. And anyway, he had a big party when the barn was finished. So, but you know the funny part of it is, he liked rainy days because he could stay inside and read. But you know, he read true story magazines and things like that. And he was a very well-spoken man. But I couldn't believe it when I first saw him reading a true story magazine.
Well, that was the entertainment.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
But I'm sure he read other things too. But my Aunt Caroline died about when she was 65, and she was a jolly person, but she got some kind of a blood poisoning in her knee. So whenever she came to our place, I can remember she had to put her knee on a chair because it bothered her so much, and she would stay up until midnight cooking a lot of times, and she cooked a lot. But then she had the kitchen to herself, and she got a lot done, you know, and then the food was ready for the next day.
I think Mom and Dad were thinking about her when they named Caroline.
I wondered about that.
I think there's a relationship.
Yeah, because she wasn't a blood relative of ours, but she was, you know, like a favorite aunt, actually. Because she had a great sense of humor, and in spite of that trouble with her leg, it didn't stop her from being friendly and having the kids' friends around. And you always, you know, if you came there, we went there quite often, but there was always a gang of people there, and they would sit around this huge kitchen. And then they had a big dining room, a living room, and a parlor. And my cousin Esther, who was the oldest, would take her boyfriend, whom she later married, into the parlor, and they entertained him there.
Okay.
Oh, things were so different. But even though they were, and I can remember when we would be outside,